I want to thank all of you for coming back. Let's see, make sure I'm not creating too much feedback here. It's really been a pleasure to do this for a couple of days, and I look forward to doing it for a couple more. One concept that gets a lot of attention when discussing life online is identity. And it's a concept that people have always grappled with, but the fundamental idea of identity seems to be undergoing a radical shift as the virtual world encroaches more and more onto the physical. Right? We talked about this yesterday a bit. Shall I continue? Today our online, let's try this. Let's try it that way. So today our online activities affect but rarely overshadow our physical selves. But in the future, this could change, and our identities in everyday life will come to be defined more and more by our virtual activities and association, something which some of you will sort of be very excited about and others will be worried about. But the interesting fact is that the world's virtual population will outnumber the number of actual people on the earth. So we're going to have more virtual identities than people. Interesting. So the shift from having one's identity shaped offline to an identity that is fashioned online will have implications for individuals, states, and companies as they navigate this new digital world. Now, this data revolution will bring an unprecedented set of choices, right, and options to individuals. And identity will become the most valuable commodity for citizens in the future, and it will primarily exist online. Now, you'd say, ideally, all people would have the incredible self-awareness to closely manage their online identities and the virtual lives that they lead. I'm sure everyone here does that. Monitoring and shaping them from an early age so as not to limit their opportunities in later life, if you get what I mean. By the time you're in your middle age, we will have accumulated and stored a comprehensive online narrative, all facts and fictions, every misstep and every triumph, spanning every phase of our lives. One of my friends said that this is the age of no heroes, because you can't be a hero and be human too. The fact of the matter is we're going to know everything good, everything bad, everything true, and everything false, all at the same time. Interesting. The implications of this are going to shift pretty early in people's lives. Some parents will deliberately choose unique names and unusually spelled traditional names so that the children will have an edge in search results, right? Some weird name that only your child has, making them much easier to locate them and promote them online without any competition. Sort of it's a win by name strategy. Others will go the opposite route and choosing basic and popular names so the children will just fit right in. They'll live in an online world with some degree of shelter from this new internet sort of domination of identity. And parent-teacher associations will advocate for privacy and security classes to be taught alongside sex classes in the children's schools. Some classes will teach them how to optimize their privacy and security settings and train them to become well-versed in the do's and the don'ts of this virtual world. Now, we're going to see a proliferation of businesses, maybe some of you will start some, that cater to privacy and reputation concerns. People will have identity managers, if you will. People will pay for active management of one's online presence by receiving quarterly reports from your identity manager tracking the changing shape of your online identity. Think of it as sort of a graph. And this will become sort of a new normal for the prominent and those aspire to be prominent and the obsessive parents that we all know and love, and hopefully we are not. But more interestingly, in deeply conservative societies where social shame is very, very heavily weighed, and you can imagine the ones I'm talking about, I think we're going to see a form of virtual honor killing. You want to sort of try to, there must be an additional source of feedback. It's off. It's off. This one's off. It's already off. We'll try it. Hold on. These dedicated, this kind of virtual honor killing which are going to be dedicated to ruin a person's online identity either preemptively or reactively. So online identity will become such a powerful currency that we'll even see a rise of a new kind of black market where people can buy pre-made real or invented identities. Companies will offer you to insure your online identity against theft and hacking, fraudulent accusations, misuse, and appropriation. Basically, this generation, in my view, your generation, will be the first generation to have an indelible record. This record will be the record of all your activities and associations online, and everything added to the internet will become part of this permanent repository. One way to think about it is you think about it when you start as a baby, right? You have kind of total control over your identity because you haven't done anything. But as you get older, more and more of your identity is going to be controlled by others, what people say about you, or what people thought about you, or what impact you had or didn't have. And so people will be held responsible for their virtual associations, past and present, which raises the risk for nearly everyone, since people's online networks tend to be larger and more diffuse than their physical ones. Yesterday we talked a little bit about the Dunbar number, right, and the fact that you have so many larger associations, if you will, in the online world, which is generally a good thing. Now the good and bad behavior of those that they know will affect them positively and negatively. And no, I don't think stricter privacy settings or social networking services are going to suffice, although people will certainly try that. Now, individuals are going to try, and they're going to have some discretion over what they share, but it will be impossible to control what others capture and share, right? Some people will sort of self-destruct, right, in this model, and they'll make mistakes, and the teachers will tell them not to, but the fact of the matter is we're all going to be part of this. And while most of us are concerned about privacy and security, there's some who will cheer the end of it, and they use this power to expose any information as they see fit. So think about whistleblowing sites. Regionality may determine the future of these more than anything else. Eventually, though, the technology used by these platforms will be so sophisticated that they'll be effectively unblockable. And I could describe why if you want to hear. Future whistleblowing websites will surely move beyond mirror sites, in other words, copies of existing sites, and use complicated new computer science techniques to replicate and obfuscate their operations to prevent that from, sort of shield them from authorities, legitimate or not. One of the things that I did is I met with Julian Assange, now, shall we say, comfortably living in a new location, and he argued strongly that the network and the role that he played was to prevent governments from doing evil because systematic evil requires documentation and the leaking of that prevents it. Right? This was his view, and we'll see how the world judges that. There's also the possibility, however, that the sites will emerge created by people who share the design and the scale of the whistleblower platforms, but not their motivations. A classic example here is instead of functioning as a clearinghouse for whistleblowers, they could serve as a way to host all manner of pilfered digital content, right? Leaked active military operations, hacked bank accounts, stolen passwords, home addresses, without any particular agenda beyond anarchy. Operators of these sites would not be ideologues or political activists, they would be the agents of chaos. And of course we have the very legitimate concern over copyright violations, because for the same reasons, once the bits are out there, they can be stored and replicated in places that are essentially impossible to delete from, although people will certainly try, which has a material financial impact on the owners of that content. So again, these are challenges, and they're going to get worse, right? Because the underlying premise of the technology is the technology can be federated, can be hid, can be made accessible in multiple places. It's very hard to fully get rid of. So what about the corporate world? How will these changes affect these companies? Well, smart consumers are going to look not just at the quality of products, but they're also going to look at how easy it makes it for you to control your privacy and your security. Certain subsections of the technology industry will, for example, receive particularly negative attention, and they'll have trouble recruiting engineers or scaling or monetizing their products because they're not a good place to work. So there's a sort of check and balance on this, and at least the legitimate corporations can't do too much evil in this space because of reputational harm. But nevertheless, everybody's going to face this issue. So technology companies, right, will obviously find themselves, beset by public concerns over privacy and security, user protections. It won't be possible to avoid these discussions. Many, many people are trying to, but they won't be able to avoid them. In many cases, these are startups run by young people who don't really understand the implications of what they're doing. And as they grow up, they're going to grow up real quickly, learning what happens when you cross these various lines. And when formulating technology these policies, technology companies will, like governments, increasingly have to factor in all the kind of domestic and international dynamics, as well as the political risk environment, diplomatic relationships between states, and the rules that govern citizens' lives. Yesterday I talked a little bit about this sort of natural order of computers do some things, humans do others. And we're going to find that natural order through this process. But critically, these companies will have to figure out how to live up more than to their security and privacy responsibilities if they want to avoid unwanted government regulation. We mentioned again yesterday a little bit about government regulation, and the fact of the matter is government regulation is going to come. Now the cloud, and people here I think generally know what the cloud means, but think of it as a set of servers which are generally available, independent of your location, that provide some important service. It's called cloud computing. So it's already revolutionized the way we handle information. In the future, people will increasingly trust cloud storage over physical machinery. And they're going to put faith in companies and give us, or generically, some of their most sensitive information, avoiding the risks of their own hard drive crashes, computer theft, or document loss. 10 years ago, everybody had all this information on their PCs and Macs. Now they all have it in places like Google's iDrive and other sort of choices. What's interesting about this cloud computing is data is rarely erased on computers. It's often a surprise. You cannot simply assume that there's a simple delete button. In most computers, the option to delete data is largely an illusion. Lost files, deleted emails, erased text messages can be recovered with minimal effort. Operating systems tend to remove only a file's listing from the internal directory anyway, keeping the file's content in place until the space is needed or reclaimed. And even after a file has been overwritten, it's occasionally possible to recover parts of the original content due to the magnetic properties of the disk that these things are stored in. This problem in computer science is known as data remnants by people in my world. But the fact of the matter is that not only is there no delete button, but when you thought you had deleted it, it may take some time before it gets out there, and you may still be subject to that. So again, this is a pretty big change, I think, for all of us in the way we think about how we live our lives. So what's interesting about cloud computing is it only reinforces the permanence of information. It adds another layer of remote protection for users and information. But imagine, right, states will also come under increasing pressure to protect their citizens from the permanence of what appears to be on the internet and from their own newly exposed vulnerabilities. In democracies, this means new laws. So it makes sense, again, that this is the beginning of a very long debate over how to handle all of this data, all of this accumulated, and so forth. And countries will decide differently, right? Not everybody will do the same thing. So for companies and for governments, this thriving data set is a gift, and in many ways it's quite interesting. It allows them to better respond to citizen and customer concerns, to micro-target specific demographics of the population, and with something called predictive analytics to predict what the future will hold. Now, if in the context of the American discuss over civil liberties, that sentence frightens people. Because there have been attempts by the US government to actually do this and actually track what everybody is doing. And every time we get close to this, which is technologically possible, everybody goes crazy because they're afraid of the crossing that line that I was describing. I mentioned yesterday being at Ciudad Juarez in Mexico, we were shown a data center, which they were very proud of, which allowed you to observe everything going on in the country, all of the traffic stops, all of the movements of all the players, all the cell phone action, and they could cross-correlate and do data mining against all of the activities in order to find drug dealers, which again is their key problem in the country. Of course, that system could also be used for other things. It's quite obvious when you look at it, it's a generically powerful system, right? So what happens 10 years ago, or 10 years from now, or 20 years from now when they do that? So democratic countries, corruption, crime, and personal scandals may be more difficult to get away with in the age of comprehensive citizen engagement. Everybody has a phone, everybody is a reporter. Individuals will work hand in hand to hold their leaders in account, and they'll have the tools necessary to determine whether their government tells them is the truth. So that empowerment is very, very powerful. So what's interesting then is that large portions of us will will demand government action to protect personal privacy, but at a much greater volume than we have heard before. So I think in 10 years, more politicians will understand how communications and technologies work. There's sort of a lag between what the technology speaks, what the young people can do, and the way the politicians perceive what they have to do to lead the country. The result, of course, will finally be public figures in government who can lead much more informed and subtle debates over these issues than we've seen up till now, whether it's privacy, security, or user protection. So citizens, in this case, living under autocracies, will have to fight even harder for their privacy and security. My own view, and I'll say this today and tomorrow as well, is you're going to have to fight for your privacy or you're going to lose it, right? The reason is there are many, many, many reasons why your privacy is naturally ebbing away here. And in the case of authoritarian regimes, they're not even going to listen to you, right? They don't have to listen to you. They're going to put up a vicious fight. They'll leverage the permanence of information and their control over mobile phones and internet service providers to create an environment of heightened vulnerability for their citizens. And what little privacy existed before will be long gone, because the handsets that citizens have with them will all double as surveillance bugs. Regimes have always wanted to have these. They've always wanted to be able to bug everybody and monitor them. Well, now the very necessity of communications and mobile devices allows these authoritarian, and in my view relatively evil regimes, to do this on a personal handset basis. So that's, again, another consequence of this mobile revolution and something that we need to fight against. And I should say, by the way, that the reason I talk about this is not because I like it, I obviously don't, but because if we talk about it, we can come up with technological solutions that will address this, right? Which is why there's a reason to fight through these things. So what will happen, of course, is regimes in this case will compromise the device even before it's sold, giving them access to everything that they care about, both in terms of private and public behavior. It really is a police state 2.0, right? So repressive governments will be able to determine who is censored and who has circumvention applications on their handsets or even their homes. So even the non-dissident will become under increased security. What you can do is you can monitor web traffic and you can look for anomalies. And while it's very difficult to detect, for example, if half the people are using VPNs and the other half are not, we can certainly find the 1,000 people in, for example, China who are using the illegal VPNs and target them and find them and go after them. So again, the technology is not completely perfect here, at least from our value perspective. And we need to figure out ways to fix that. Another example is states would be able to set up random checkpoints of raids to search people's devices for encryption and proxy software. And if it threatens the regime, you don't think these guys will be ready to do that? They're ready to do lots of things to their citizen. I'm sure they'd be happy to search your phone too. Not here, of course, but in some of these countries, you betcha. Just being in the background of a person's photo could matter if a government's face recognition software were to recognize a known dissident in the picture. Being documented in the wrong place at the wrong time, whether by photo, voice, or IP address, could land unwitting citizens in an unwanted spotlight. There have been quite a few interesting experiments about this. People have set up HD cameras in a stadium, and they've done tests recognizing the people in the stadium. I personally find this absolutely terrifying, right, that you could do this, but the quality of face recognition is so accurate that if you have so many pictures on the web, which many of you do because of Facebook and other sort of personal testimony, you can in fact be recognized as long as it's a straight-on shot with greater than 50% accuracy. That's an important technological challenge for all of us, and we're not going to go to baseball games wearing masks. So the fact of the matter is we're going to have to sort of deal with this. Connectivity also means that information, blackouts, propaganda, official histories will fail to compete with the public access to outside information. And that cover-ups, right, which governments also like to engage in, we're well documented, will backfire in the face of informed and connected populations. Here if you read the British press, which I'm sure you all do, you see story after story, people getting in trouble and they try to sort of prevent the publication of that, and the cover-up is always worse than the crime. Right? So the fact of the matter is here we've all adapted to that. This is a new fact for many of these countries. But citizens will be able to capture, share, and remark upon an event even before the government can decide what to say or do about it because of the speed. and thanks also because of these cheap mobile devices. So this grassroots power is pretty evenly distributed throughout even the large countries. And it means a tremendous shift of power to those citizens, even in the face of these tools and behaviors from the government. So in failed states, phones have helped enable, and we talked about Somalia, they've been able to help the education, the healthcare, security, commercial opportunities, all of that. Mobile technology will also provide the much needed intellectual, social, and entertainment outlets for populations who have been psychologically traumatized by this environment. This is a pretty big deal. So citizens will demonstrate an increased reliance on anonymous peer-to-peer communication methods. That's the one way in which citizens can protect themselves, is to connect directly to each other. And governments, of course, will try very hard to make that hard, especially in autocratic governments. And in a world with no delete button, a peer-to-peer networking probably will become the default mode of operation for anyone looking to stay underneath the radar. Because there's no memory, it's not recorded anywhere. You don't have to delete it. It's not stored in the server. So imagine a judge sits there and says, well, I want to see the records of all that communications. And the engineer says, didn't keep them, sorry. And then the judge says, well, why not? I said, well, it's peer-to-peer. And I said, well, why didn't you route it through a server? I said, I didn't want to. And then the judge orders him to do a connection to a server, right, to avoid it. That, by the way, that little scenario is the future of telephony. Because telephony laws all assume wiretapping, and you can't wiretap peer-to-peer, right? So I'm not making that one up. So if we then think about that, new applications of augmented reality technology, and augmented reality, for those of you who haven't heard the term, is the superimposition of touch, sound, and images in the virtual world over a physical real-world environment. I think they promise a much richer experience. We're working on this project called Google Glass. I'm sure you've seen it. Eyeglasses with a built-in display over one eye that can convey information, handle messages through voice command, and shoot and record video through its camera, and other devices from these companies are on the way. So that sort of moves us up in the sort of communications technology from this traditional texting model that we're also used to. So in the future, the intersection of this wearable technology, the glasses and stuff, augmented reality where you can see digital things superimposed on your physical world, and peer-to-peer communications will combine sensory data, rich information channels, and secure communications to generate exceptionally interesting and useful devices against some of these sort of global and government threats. Now, it's interesting. So what do repressive states do? Well, repressive states will display little hesitation on their attempts to ban or gain control of this peer-to-peer communications, because they will correctly see that this is how the threats to the existence of the state occur. Democratic states, of course, will have to act much more deliberately, and correctly so. So if illegal activity is the primary concern of governments, and of course there's always illegal activity, the real challenge will be the combination of the virtual currency, right? So this is another example. A combination of virtual currency with anonymous networks that hide the physical location of the services. So the bankers are going to go crazy because they don't know quite what to do with this virtual service, and they can't track the use of the virtual currency in physical space. And again, a new set of issues and new threats will emerge from there. So I have a strong belief here that in the long run, the presence of communications technology in society is going to chip away at most autocratic governments. Since, as we've seen, the chances that a restrictive, information-shy regime has against an empowered citizenry armed with personal fact-checking devices gets progressively worse with each embarrassing incident. In the near term, however, such regimes will be able to exploit the growth of connectivity to their advantage as they exploit the law and the media. There are a number of people who are trying to create personal mesh networks. Today you can Bluetooth to Bluetooth to Bluetooth to phones to trade information. They don't scale in the way that modern telecommunications do, but they provide an important outlet in how this all works. So scaling now back up to the states, what do? Well, we have this arms for minerals trade, everybody understands that. We can imagine that the growth of a technology for minerals exchange between technology poor but resource rich countries. These are often countries that don't have a lot of rights for their citizens. So they want to be able to impose further restrictions on the independence of their citizens. They can get it from somebody else in return for their minerals. Once one regime builds its surveillance state, it will share with others what it learned. The companies that sell data mining software and surveillance cameras and other products will flaunt their work with one government to attract new business. So this is coming. And in the future, voice recognition and facial recognition, biometrics, if you will largely surpass all of these earlier forms in accuracy and use. It's getting better. So it really will be possible for a country to be a technology exporter of bad things. Right? I'm sure that in the US and Britain and in Europe, this stuff will be illegal to export it for all sorts of good reasons, but it won't be illegal everywhere. And by the way, states are not going to be the only people trying to acquire this biometric data. Warlords, cartels, terrorist groups that will seek to build or access biometric databases in order to track recruits, monitor potential victims, and keep an eye on their own organizations. The same logic applies here to dictators. If they have something to trade, if they have something to, they can get the technology that they wanted to. And given the strategic value of these databases, states will need to prioritize protection of citizens' information just as they would safeguard mass weapons of destruction. There's this very, very complicated intersection over what's private and what's not. Give a classic example in America, which makes no sense to British people. We have this bizarre debate over guns, and it turns out that in the course of all of the, after the terrible shooting in Connecticut, in one town, there was a series of bad things, and a particular hacker group decided to take the names of all of the legal and registered gun owners and out them, right? Now, your view as to whether that's a legitimate activity or not is very much determined by your view of whether the laws in America are appropriate or inappropriate and what you think about legal ownership of guns. But my point here is not to defend one side or the other. I have my own personal opinion on that, which you can imagine. But the fact of the matter is that this example, right, of public protest and private, in this case, outing and theft of data as well, is going to be repeated over and over and over again in each of these intersection points in every one of these countries, with different outcomes depending on which country you're in. So let me put this into a little bit of perspective and then come and ask for your questions and comments. The trail of information that will shape our online identities in the future begins well before any citizen has the judgment to understand it. This is the problem of being a kid. You don't have the ability to understand that what you're doing ultimately prejudges the outcome of your life 30 years from now. The scrutiny that young people will face in the next decade will be unlike anything we've ever seen. Did you see what he looked like when he was 12? And did you see what she looked like when she was 16 and throwing up? And I'm so happy that I'm personally not subject to that burden, because I remember those years, and I suspect all of you have your similar stories. It's hard to believe that some politicians won't champion the cause of stealing juvenile online records. The society has sort of organized this notion that below 18 or so, you're a juvenile and you're subject to different rules and different standards, because you're not really capable of adult responsibility and decision making. Other laws will emerge as attempts to safeguard privacy and increase the liability for those releasing confidential information. The problem is that once released, even if the person is penalized, the information is still out there. Right? So again, it's the lack of a delete button, which we talked about yesterday, interacts with that in a really, really deep way. So I think the wave of civil society organizations will emerge in the next decade to shield connected citizens from their governments and from themselves. I personally believe that there's a greater threat from governments overreaching than anything else, because in many cases they'll make mistakes, and in many cases they have legitimate reasons why they want to overreach, and we'll see this battle over and over again. We've seen this in the US, and I'm sure we'll see it here as well. Powerful lobbying groups will advocate content and privacy laws. Rights organizations will document repressive surveillance tactics and call for better citizen protection. There'll be support groups that will help different demographics deal with the consequences of undeletable data. I wonder what an older person who is not really familiar with all the things that we're talking about in this seminar, how will they process all of this? How will they get through it? Someone's going to have to help them. And educational organizations are going to have to teach and reach school-age children to avoid sort of oversharing. You know, you've heard the term TMI, too much information. You're going to need to be taught that pretty early, I think. So people who try to perpetuate harmful stories about religion, culture, ethnicity, anything else, they're going to struggle to keep their narrative afloat amid a sea of newly informed listeners, which means it'll be much, much harder to start your own guerrilla movement, because you have to suspend belief in order to really make that stuff happen. And destroying documents, disappearing people, demolishing monuments, restrictive and repressive actions like those will lose much of their functional and symbolic power in the digital age. We've all grown up with that. Destroy the statue, burn the building, burn the library. Doesn't matter. Just rebuild it all. We have it all. Those documents would be recoverable, having been stored in the cloud, and the pressure that an active and globalized internet community can produce when rallied against injustice will make the governments think twice before snatching anyone or detaining him indefinitely. You can imagine a bad government takes over, and then some volunteers take all the information from that country and store it somewhere else until that government fails, and then reinstall it. Right? No different from the people who hid art treasures in World War II when evil things were happening, and then they restored it after we all won. In the end, security and privacy are shared. It's important. They're shared between companies, users, and institutions around us. I think Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, the usual suspects, we should be expected to safeguard your data, to prevent these systems from being hacked into, and to provide the most effective tools that you can use to maximize your privacy. But it's up to users and to each of us to leverage these tools. Each day you choose not to utilize them, you will experience some loss of privacy and security as the data keeps piling up. But what I do know is that the power of this technology that we're talking about this week is so incredibly useful that people will use them. And so when we build these tools, when we build this technology, we've got to build it in a way that people can consume it and people can protect themselves from these kinds of issues. And I further believe that there's a set of significant new innovation that will help address some of the obvious pitfalls of this new and connected world. So with that, thank you very much.